Hello, my name is Steve Gagnon, and I am the chair of the Reading, Connecticut Republican Town Committee. And I would like to welcome you to this video log that we'll be discussing microschooling. One of the big differences, one of the big concerns for families over the last 6 months has been how to best educate their children during the COVID-19 crisis. In response to this dilemma, a spontaneous solution called microschooling has become increasingly popular around the country. Here to tell you more about microschooling are three local Reading residents: David Bohn, Lew Andrews, and Ruth O'Donnell. As board members of the Children's Education Opportunity Foundation, David and Lew have long been familiar with the alternative schooling. In addition, David and his wife Missy have homeschooled all their children. David, since you have indeed homeschooled your children, why don't you give us a basic definition of microschooling and tell us how it differs from homeschooling?
Okay, good question. Homeschooling, of course, has been around for quite some time now in the United States. We're probably coming up on 20 to 30 years. And homeschooling is parents deciding to educate their children not in a private school or not in a public school, but in their homes. And so it is 100% parent directed. And in the case of our home, Missy and I had complementary educational backgrounds in the humanities and then in the sciences. That even though it was a bit scary for us because we weren't homeschooled, we wanted to really direct the education of our kids. We wanted to expose them to courses of study that weren't available in the Reading public schools, and we wanted to give them what we feel is a much broader education and a deeper one. So, what we did in our home is the classic homeschooling model. Parent stays home with the kids and directs their direct education K through 12. There are tremendous, back when we started, there were a lot, but now there are tremendous homeschooling curricula out there for parents. They don't need to be afraid. There's so much support and information and really excellent curricula to give their kids a great education. So that's homeschooling. If you move to the micro school, this new phenomenon of the micro school, that is a decision by more than one family to get together. It might be a neighborhood of parents that get together, and it is still parent directed and overseen by the parents, but they might hire a tutor, they might hire a math teacher, they might hire a science teacher, they might hire an English and history teacher, and they would basically from home to home create a school setting for the kids. And what we found is parents are going and finding churches or other facilities that they're renting. And this has been a very, very great development, I think, for education, because it shows, what everybody's been told is, education is just for the, quote unquote professionals, and that it's some mysterious thing that nobody can do, except for, professional educators or something like this. But what homeschooling has proved for 30 years now, and what microschools are proving, is that kids actually get deeper, more well-rounded educations, particularly when you have the parents so involved in that education. So that's the difference.
Excellent, thank you. Lew, David touched upon some of the economics. I've heard that micro schools could cost $20, $30, $40, even more $1,000 a year. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the economics of microschooling?
Yeah, I don't want to scare parents too much with those figures. That's what you read in the newspapers when you hear about microschooling, or sometimes called pod schooling,
Mm-hmm.
where you get parents, as David said, in a neighborhood, they get together and they decide they're going to educate their own kids. But they want to bring in a professional, maybe a retired teacher. I think there have been stories about Harvard professors being hired, retired Harvard professors being hired to run these schools. And so you can have a situation where, say, 10 families put in 10,000, 15,000 each, and you're hiring a very high level person. But you really doesn't have to cost you any money at all. If you have, say, 10 kids from 10 different families, it's possible that each family could volunteer 1 day a week to do the schooling, oversee the schooling for 10 kids. And that way, you both parents in a two-parent family can still keep their jobs, or a single parent could still keep their job if they have an employer that's willing to be a little flexible. And as David said, the other possibility is, instead of having to have 10 kids go from one home to the next, what you can do is see if there's a local pastor who'd be willing to allow the church to be used as a place, as a venue for a school. That's happening a lot all over the country because churches, most of them aren't used most of the week. And so it's a great way for churches to provide their parishioners with a service, namely a place to educate their kids. Homeschool could be not 10 members of of a little community, but 10 of a neighborhood, but 10 members of a church. And then you have the possibility as well that you can draw on the resources of a church. There are other members of the church that might be able to come in, do something extra with the kids. You have a bigger space, so there are activities the kids can do. So it's possible to go very high end and run a school with Harvard professors, and it's possible to go very economical and run a micro school, a pod school in a church for nothing.
Great, great. David, speaking of Harvard, how do parents basically ensure that this education will be sufficient to get them into college if the kids so choose to go that route?
Oh, that's an excellent question. First of all, to the parents that might be listening in that are considering this, but they're scared to do it. They didn't go. They weren't homeschooled. They weren't in a micro school. And am I going to deprive my children of the quality education that I received? Yeah, I can assure those parents that you can provide your children with a rich educational experience. And the side benefit of this is that this deepens the relationship between parent and child. And we live in a crazy world. And children need to be connected to their parents to navigate the dangerous waters of our culture now that's lost its bearings. And so the primary fear of Missy and I was, every year we took the, testing, make sure that we were on pace when we were in elementary school, middle school, high school, took the SATs and so forth. How do we make sure that our kids are on pace? Not just that they're doing their work and they're getting good grades in their work, but how do they compare nationally to other children? And what's wonderful about it is, what we decided is we wanted to know for our 5 children, how did they compare to private school kids? But then we also wanted to know how they compared to public school kids. So every year we did standardized testing for our children, which is actually a lot more testing than they get in the public school system. And in private schools, they'll only test Lew, right, in grade 6, grade 8, or and so forth.
Fixed years, huh?
Yeah, so we actually tested every year, and what we would do to compare our children to private school children was we would use the Iowa test.
Okay.
And the Iowa test, still available today, far superior, by the way, to the Connecticut Mastery Test, because it compares your child to every child in the nation that goes to private schools. Okay, and so we use the Iowa test on 1 year to compare our kids to where they compare to their grade level in private school, and then we would test in our kids with the Stanford Achievement Test, and that would compare our kids to where they were against their counterparts in public school. And what we found every year was that our kids tested significantly higher than their counterparts in public school, and I would have to say significantly higher also than the kids in the private schools. But what's important about those Stanford tests and the Iowa test is that they're national norm reference tests. The Connecticut Mastery Test, which is ginned up by the Department of Education in Connecticut, is not a national norm reference test, and you don't know how your kids are comparing to other states. Mm-hmm. So it is deficient, and if I had my kid in private or public school, I would have these tests every year anyhow. Mm-hmm. So we took those, we recorded those. Those would be the last things that would go into their year's worth of work binder. We kept every year of their academic work in an 8-inch 3-ring binder, and had all their tests, all their grades, and then we would have that there, and that is what reassured us that our kids were at or well beyond their grade level in educational achievement.
Nice, very nice. So one thought came to mind is on a micro school, there tends to be a facility or a size restriction. So if someone, say, is opening a micro school, how do they address having all the electronic equipment, the kids in one place, or whatnot?
Right. I touched on this a little bit before, in that if you were just homeschooling your own kids, maybe you could do it in your own house. I mean, a lot of families do that, but if you're talking about pooling 10 families, 10 kids, every family might not want to entertain all those kids on alternate days. Although it's possible, and I could think in some neighborhoods, but in other neighborhoods, I think the first choice would be to go to a local church or synagogue, and ask there. A lot of churches and synagogues around the country are open to this. Mm-hmm. A lot of towns have community centers. Presumably, maybe something like the YMCA might be open to it. I would think that every town probably has some kind of facility that you as a resident and you and your friends in the school together as town residents should have theoretically some kind of access to. So it doesn't have to be in the home. It just has to be in a place where you can plug in 10 laptops.
Great. Open this question up to the floor. What do homeschooled or microschooled children do about sports?
Well, I think, Ruth, I want you to jump in after I answer this on that. Well, that's a challenging thing because Connecticut, unlike many other states, once you aren't enrolled in the government school system or the public school system, the principals, most people don't know this, but the principals all belong to a private athletic association. And that athletic association, made up of the principals of all the public schools in the state of Connecticut, have a rule. And the rule is if you're homeschooled, you can't participate in Connecticut public school sports.
Really? Even though the parents are paying taxes?
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where if anybody challenged this legally, it would fall. It's just it would take a significant amount of money to challenge it because we know that the teachers unions and the public schools have a lot of resources that individual parents don't have. But in other states, you could have a micro school, but if every one of those kids wasn't getting a what they felt was a great chemistry class experience, mm-hmm. you just notify the public school and you could go in and take a chemistry course. Those micro school kids could go in. Now that's not the case in Connecticut, and along the same lines, in other states, most other states allow parents that homeschool or micro school their children, allow them to participate in team sports within the district that they pay taxes. So my children were barred. Some of the coaches wanted them to play because they saw them playing in the club sports, but and they tried, but they were barred from playing in Reading sports. And what we did is we, whether I had to start a team and coach it and get involved in the club circuit for soccer, for instance, I did that with all of my children. So for soccer season, they played soccer. The boys played baseball, and they played club baseball. So not the school baseball, but club sports. We got very involved with that. And basketball, we actually played in, we played some of the Park and Rec, Reading. And then when I wanted my boys to see that, they weren't so great, I brought them to Danbury, and I had them play Danbury Park and Rec basketball, and they found out they weren't as fast and couldn't jump as high as they thought. But so my point there, and Ruth actually could talk about it from experience because she grew up as a homeschooler in Reading. If there are so many great avenues for parents that don't have to be related to the public school. You can have your child play every sport: lacrosse, soccer, basketball, baseball, swimming, diving. There are all of these opportunities. It takes a little bit more work, but again, the fact is those are extra hours you get to be with your kids. And what I've found is the time that I had with my kids, I thought it was so hectic, but it went by so fast. And I'm grateful now for all those hours of driving to practices and soccer games and coaching and all of those things. But I talked to somebody probably that went through it, get a better answer.
So my experience was I did play in elementary school. I played in the Park and Rec department, basketball, soccer. Those were the main two. And then when I was in middle school, I was still able to participate in that. And then I got into the town travel sports. And in that case, I was able to play for the town. This was pre-high school. And then, of course, in 8th grade, we had a Reading travel team. We were really good. He was the coach. And we traveled around in Fairfield County, and we played really well. And then the following year, of course, all of my friends on the soccer team made the high school team at Barlow in Reading. And I did try to petition Barlow to join that team. And of course, I wasn't allowed to. But the main thing is that we had some, in that time, we really did develop as athletes. And all of my counterparts were able to go ahead and play for the town. And I felt at the time, of course, that I was good enough to play, and I wasn't able to. However, he mentioned that there are other avenues, other ways to play tennis. To play sports. I was able to go to Ridgefield and play tennis. There was a Ridgefield travel team, and we practiced at the Ridgefield Tennis Club. And I went and got to play tennis in New Haven competitively at Yale. So that was a great opportunity. I was able to. There are other soccer leagues around Connecticut. I was able to play soccer in Weston, in Ridgefield, in Wilton. So even through high school, we were able to find other towns that would allow me to play with their travel sports teams. Again, after high school, I never played sports in Reading again. But I was, for the homeschooler, microschooling parent, there are other options out there, and I was able to continue to develop as an athlete. I really got into tennis into high school, and I was able to continually develop as an athlete. I was also went to Danbury, and I played piano and violin competitively in Connecticut through a private teacher, but I was able to join the Danbury Symphony Orchestra through my teacher, but they also take applications in their community orchestra, and I was able to be a part of that, the Danbury music community, by auditioning and joining these musical outlets, and we would have a concert once a month. I met a lot of people. So that was a really great experience for me too, that had, again, that with it was educational as well, and it had nothing to do with where I was going to school. And it really helped me develop in high school as an adult. And so again, there are, just because my experience was the way that it was, it doesn't mean that I did not get to continually develop as an athlete or as a musician in the other case.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to that. Obviously, there's a little bit of extra thought that has to go into it for your child. There's a little bit more effort exerted, not much, because public school parents have to do all the driving too, and stuff like that. But a little bit more thought, a little bit more effort. But once Missy and I went through that door, the opportunities actually opened up for our children, as opposed to being closed down in terms of only what the public school system could offer. So once we went through the door with Ruth, she's our number one child. She's followed by 4 boys. And of course, she always has to do everything twice as good to show that her supremacy. But so she didn't take just one instrument; she took 2 instruments and became masterful in both of them. But the boys each, we wanted them to be involved in music, and they were benefited from the music programs like Ruth was talking about. So. What we found was if just to take that little bit of extra courage, go through that door, all of a sudden you realize the possibilities are greater. The opportunities are greater. And the experiences are very often so much more rich. Her experiences in the Danbury Orchestra and the friendships and relationships that she formed and so forth. It equipped her to become a well-rounded young adult so much sooner than her counterparts in public school or private school.
So you turn that negative into a very big positive.
We didn't know it was going to turn into a positive, but it did, yes.
Right.
The resources and opportunities in our communities have just grown since I was in school. I have a neighbor who homeschools in a co-op now, and her kids are always at some kind of activity with friends, and it's usually centered around some sort of education or art or music. And I look at those children and I think that they are getting such a well-rounded experience, not just in math and science and English and history, the basics, but also these other avenues, allowing them to kind of get into their creative side as well. And again, there are just so many more resources and so many more opportunities now for homeschoolers and microschoolers than there have ever been before.
I happen to know about the story relative to your neighbor. I think it's important for Steve to hear why she took her kids out of the public school.
So a few years ago, the incident at Sandy Hook really shook her up, and of course, this is a relatively small community, and that really upset her. She had 2 kids in elementary school at the time. So because of that, she decided to take fewer hours at work and spend time homeschooling their children. And she had not been homeschooled. Her husband, nobody in her family had ever been homeschooled. I'm not even sure of the level of her formal education. So this was someone who was very scared to step into the homeschooling, microschooling community. But because of the resources that are available, she was able to take advantage of a local co-op, which is, again, parents that come together to teach their children, or now with the COVID-19 phenomenon on education, they are bringing in virtual teachers from all over the world that they're able to get to teach their kids. Yes, and that's something that is new this year for them, but she had told me about that. And so again, someone who really didn't have any background in education or micro schooling or homeschooling was able to get into it with her two kids. And again, they are constantly doing educational projects. They are constantly doing educational things. She is not the only person that is overseeing her children's education. There are professional teachers in her group. And I know that is important to some people, that they have someone with an educational background kind of overseeing what they're doing, and she does. And they do take testing to see where they stack up in Connecticut and in the country. And she is very, it's been probably about 5 years now, and she's not 5 years, it's been a few years, and she is very dedicated to the homeschooling, micro schooling, the way of education for her children. So it's been interesting to see, as I've lived next to her, to see how she has the things that she's chosen for her children, and that she has been able to direct it herself, and she's been able to spend time with her kids and be a part of their educational experience and make sure that they're getting the type of education that, parents know their kids better than anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
You would really think that is of huge value to each parent. And of course, I'm a mother now, and it is immensely important to me of how my child gets educated. I want to be a part of that process. So
Thank you. So, Lou, where could people get some more information on microschooling?
It's become so popular, Steve, that if I gave a resource right now, it would probably be outdated by the time someone turned on their computer or went out to look for it. I think the smartest thing to do and the easiest thing to do is just go to your computer and go to Google or to Bing and just type in, how do I start a homeschool? There's a tremendous amount of information available out there, and it's being updated all the time. And that is probably the best way to get the most current information.
Okay. David, one last question in the time we have left. Microschooling is so new that some states may not technically approve it yet. Should families worry?
The first thing that I would do is there is a tremendous resource. Now I can't think of it. The legal entity, Homeschool Legal Defense, HSLDA. So HSLDA.com, Homeschool Legal Defense .com. If I was going to do this, I'm a lifetime member. My wife's a lifetime member of HSLDA. Tremendous resources on there, by the way. You might want to start your search on HSLDA.com. That group will give you all the information in the state that you're living in as to what the hurdles are and so forth regarding starting a home school. They're also, if you become a member, they're the ones that are going to go to bat legally for you to make sure that your parental rights to educate your children are preserved and defended. And they've done great work all across the country, Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And so I would go there as a primary resource for my concerns. I would go there also to see a curricula that's available. For instance, Hillsdale College is a great resource for people that want to get homeschool or micro school educational resources, and other schools along the line. My kids, we mostly did the Becca curricula from Pensacola Christian Academy, and that's a great resource. We supplemented it when we thought that in a particular grade or age that perhaps we wanted them to have a different math experience, and so forth. Another thing that we haven't addressed yet is in many of the curricula that you can use, you can obtain a high school diploma. There's a way to do that. That's important. And it's something that I actually I should have talked about earlier, but uh, my children, you know, I had a high school diploma, so I wanted them to have one. I mean, if you have the testing, you don't necessarily need to have the diploma, but the schools that offer the various curricula that come out also offer a program to submit their work, and you graduate and get your high school diploma from a recognized educational institution, which might be a school or it might be just an academic institution that produces a homeschool or microschool curriculum. So, you know, I think when you're talking about being worried, what's going to happen to me legally in the state and so forth, I think you have to go back to what's most important in your life. And the education of your children is way up there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd risk just about anything to get my kids a great education in a safe environment where the values of our family could be passed on to them instead of having someone else's values imposed on them. And so that education is worth whatever risk. But today, the pioneers, of yesteryear, had to be a lot braver because it was an unproven method, and states came down very hard on people. But today, states, perhaps because of HSLDA winning so many lawsuits against states, but what I think it is colleges recognize and universities recognize if they see a homeschooler or a microschooler, they're going to grab that kid and accept that kid because they know that kid's not only going to come academically prepared, and they're not going to have to go through the remedial courses that these colleges now have to offer because they haven't been academically prepared to go to college, but they also know that they're going to be ready for college from a maturity standpoint because they've had these out-of-home experiences with coaches and music instructors and supplemental education people, that they're just a more mature person going to college. So I think there's very little risk today because a lot of homeschoolers have paved the way for parents today to be an accepted and preferred form of educational method.
Great. So Ruth, I'd like to wind up this segment, and as I know, you spoke about schools and some extracurricular activities as a homeschooler. So what other experiences as a homeschooled child would you like to share?
One thing that you mentioned is that I wasn't just exposed to people my own age.
Mm-hmm.
I had the extracurricular experiences, such as getting in the music community. There were people my age, and then there were adults, and I had to get very used to interacting with adults on a
Mm-hmm.
higher maturity level. I actually felt like when I went to college, I backslid maturity-wise my first year, because I was around so many people my own age. So I feel like I was very mature at 18, and then I backslid for a few years, and then I came out of it, and I'm fine now. But of course, going to college, I had to be responsible for getting up. I was responsible for, my mother would lay out all my papers, and I knew what I was supposed to do each day for school.
Mm-hmm.
However, a lot of that was left to me, and that happens often with homeschoolers, that they are not spoon-fed education as much as they need to watch their virtual class, and then you need to do the work, and then that work is going to be submitted to whichever institution is going to be giving you the diploma. And so in that sense, I think homeschoolers are trained to be self-starters and self-motivated, and that is huge when you go into the workforce. I felt like I was very prepared for college in that sense. I was very prepared to do my own work, and it was at the forefront of my mind beyond, hanging out with friends and whatever else you do in college. Education was such a priority in our home, and it was something that I knew my parents had sacrificed for, that always was I took it very seriously. So I think that there are these values that you get from homeschooling that help you later on in life. It's a form of training that you get just in the act of homeschooling. And I look back, of course, on my athletic experience in high school, and at the time it was a challenge and perhaps character building, but I don't resent any of that experience because, of course, I still got to play sports. I got to go play in other towns, meet other friends, be a part of other groups, and that all in all was a great experience for me.
That's awesome. Well, I know I learned a lot today, and I want to thank David, Ruth, and Lew for your time. At the conclusion of this, I'm going to put up an email on the screen, so if people have any further questions, they can reach out and pass them along, and maybe people want to do another one of these and get a little more information.
Sure.
So thank you very much.
Oh, you're
Thanks,
very
Steve.
welcome. Thank you, Steve.